Okay, I will call the meeting to order. In accordance with the Government Emergency Administration Act, PA 100-0640, the Northbrook Library Board finds an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent and believes it is in the best interest of the library to hold a virtual meeting to perform essential business. This meeting will be recorded as per the statutory requirements. Jennifer McGee, would you please have a roll call of the trustees present?
Yes. Ms. Bernstein,
Here.
Ms. Krisham,
Here she is.
Mr. Globinger,
Yes, I'm here. Maura, are you here?
Ms.
Yes,
Krisham,
I'm here.
Okay,
Mr.
I'm
Globinger,
here as well. I'm here.
Ms. Oliver,
Here.
Ms. Shu,
I'm here.
Ms. Young,
Here.
Ms. Unical.
Here.
Okay, we are all present. So we have a quorum. First item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there anybody who would like to ask that anything be taken off the consent agenda and put onto the regular agenda? Hearing none and seeing none, I'll ask if there's a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll
Thank you,
second.
Maura. Is it? Thank you, Barbara. Jennifer, could we please have a roll call?
Ms. Bernstein,
Yes.
Ms. Krisham,
Yes.
Mr. Globinger,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver,
Yes.
Ms. Shu,
Yes.
Ms. Young,
Abby, you're on mute. Did we just lose Abby?
yes, I think we did.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Unical,
Yes.
Okay, we had a majority of the vote, so the motion passes. The next item on the agenda is public comments. Are there any public comments yet, Kelly?
There are not.
Okay. Since there are no public comments, I think we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the staff reports from Ms. Kate Hall.
Thanks, Jay. So just a couple things from my report. I had put in the packet under my report that there are a couple ILA events coming up. The most pressing one is coming up Monday, which is the ILA legislative meetup on Monday, February 21st. If anyone is interested in attending, it is virtual at 9 o'clock. Just let me know and Anna can get you registered. We also have an email that went out to you from Linda Varing about National Library Week, which is coming up in April, and asking, we're going to be doing some social media posts, so asking the board to answer some questions, perhaps share some books that you've been enjoying or other media, so that we can use those in some of our postings during that week. If you did not see that email, just let me know and we can send that out again. And then last, ILA is having some trustee workshops from the trustee forum coming up this spring. They have, the first one is Illinois Libraries Trustees, what's the job and how do I do it? April, they're doing one on library director evaluations. And then in May, they're doing one on streamlining the budget process. So if anyone is interested in any of those, let me know that as well, and we will get you registered. Those are all virtual. They're not doing any in person just yet for those. And then I also wanted to just touch on some additional updates with COVID. As we know, things are once again changing rather quickly. We're continuing to see the numbers going down, which is great. We are also, the governor has said that he is going to be eliminating the mask mandate. The official declaration has not actually come out yet, so we don't have all the rules, but we have a pretty good idea of what is going to be in it, thanks to the press conference and other information he shared. At this point, based on what the other units of local government are doing, as well as what other libraries in the area are doing. We are planning to move to a masks recommended rather than a masks required. So we're working on signage for that. Staff will still be wearing masks at all of the public service desks and while out on the floor. But we will not be requiring patrons to do so. We are still talking about what to do regarding masking with our programs for children under the age of 5, since they are not yet able to be vaccinated. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens with the schools and the appeal on that, even though that's an older age group, and also just kind of seeing where our community members are. We've been doing some surveying on programming, as well as seeing what other organizations in town are doing. So we don't yet know what we're going to be doing regarding that and are monitoring that closely. We'll make a decision on that next week. I also wanted to just let the board know, you may or may not have seen this just yet, but we had a patron comment earlier today that was sent to the board about masking that I responded to. Just wanted to draw the board's attention to it, and just that they were requesting that we consider continuing to make the masking required. And we will do what we have continued to do throughout the pandemic, which is to do everything we can to keep everyone safe, but also recognizing that we ourselves are not public health officials. So following what is being recommended at the county, state, and federal levels, which right now is granted a little bit confusing because there is some conflict with that, but we will continue to monitor. And of course, if we see cases starting to spike again, or if we are finding that there is a change in the feeling in the community regarding masks, we will certainly think about implementing a requirement, or as we did in the past, adding vulnerable hours like we did. We will still offer accommodations for anyone that does not feel comfortable coming into the library when everyone is not required to wear a mask, just like we did on the flip side when we had people that didn't want to come in when masks were required. So we will offer curbside service, we have homebound delivery, we have all of our virtual program offerings, as well as all of our virtual ebooks. So we will certainly make that available and work with anyone who needs it in order to be able to access library services. And so that is all I have, unless anyone has any questions on anything else in my report or on anything that I just reported.
I guess, Kate, I know they're dropping the statewide mask, but I don't know where Cook County stands.
They've been super helpful. They have said that they are still monitoring. What they have done previously is that they've basically been like, oh, Chicago did this, we say ditto. But right now, Chicago is saying that they're still going to be requiring it for some things. But they also are saying that they're continuing to monitor and they might loosen up. So long story short, I think we won't find out until probably mid next week exactly what the county is doing. They're at a difficult position because they want to follow, they've always followed the state unless they were being more strict. So this would be like they've implemented additional measures. So they may very well say that they want to do this, say that they're going to continue it, at which point we would reevaluate based on that information. Right now, because they have not provided any information, we're going with what the state has said. Like I said, that we're continuing to monitor very closely. So I know that wasn't terribly helpful. Basically, we don't know.
Very confusing. Okay,
it is very confusing.
So there's nothing, like the state is clear, but there's nothing countywide that is.
The state has said they are going to be clear, but the actual declaration detailing everything has not come out. So all we have is what the governor said in the press conference last week, saying we are going to be doing this for everything minus schools and some other stuff that's required federally, but we'll give you more information. But we haven't actually seen that yet. So this is the plan now, but we're still going based on what we think is going to happen. We don't actually know 100%.
And there's nothing Cook County wise that is equally clear or unclear or specific.
Yeah, they really haven't I mean,
Okay.
there's stuff in news articles, but nothing that has been
Okay.
officially released in any way.
That is clearly unclear, so thank you.
You're welcome. It also makes it a little more challenging because in the press conference, Pritzker said that this is what they are doing, but that ultimately they recognize that every single individual entity from governmental agencies to businesses and everything in between could make their own decision. So ultimately, it is up to each individual organization, which is, of course, kind of then saying, we're doing this, but also we're making everyone else actually decide what you're doing. So it's fun. It's really fun.
Are there any other questions for Kate? Okay, seeing and hearing none, Kate, I guess we'll move on.
Sounds good.
So the next item is the board member reports. I'll start with this, and then if any other board member has something to report, we can go to the next person. Last week, Kate and I received notice from the village that the EDC, the Economic Development Committee or Commission, whatever it is, has been disbanded. So the village has decided to take the EDC and the ICDC, which is the Industrial Commission that was kind of a counterpart to the EDC that focused primarily on the industrial issues in the village, and to disband both and to create a new committee or commission that will be with a new purpose and a new focus. And so there will be no more EDC reports or meetings. The one thing that the EDC did that we liked as a village generally was it provided a forum for all of the governmental entities to come together and kind of just report to each other on a quarterly basis, just news, what has happened, what changes they've had, what issues they're dealing with. And so the village has indicated that they will try and put together a forum for that to happen continuing on a quarterly basis with the elected head of each board and the appointed head of each organization participating in this new forum, but we're waiting for details on that. So basically they're saying they'll have a quarterly meeting where all the different governing bodies can come together and talk. It will not be in a committee or commission format, so it will not be a public meeting from what they've told us. It'll just be an opportunity for those organizations to meet and to greet and talk to one another. So as we get more on that, we will kind of let you guys know what's going on and what changes there are or what information we're receiving. The other issue or the other benefit of the EDC was that when we have 6B requests or similar issues that are presented to the different boards, it was a forum where the village could present to the EDC and all of the boards could get together and talk about their thoughts on whatever was being presented for approval by the different boards. So we'll be losing that from the EDC. Hopefully this new forum will help with that as well. But when we do get to the 6B request, we'll tell you too, the village is asking for a change in the 6B procedure. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the agenda. So that was all I had to report. I don't know if there are any other board members that have anything that they'd like to report since the last month. Seeing lots of nods no. So seeing none and hearing none, I'll move on to the next item, which is unfinished business. The first item under unfinished business is the visiting other libraries. And I think what we would like to do is just have a further discussion from last month's meeting about when the board feels comfortable moving forward with visiting the Palatine Public Library. If the board is feeling more comfortable with the COVID situation, Kate was thinking that perhaps we should schedule a date in April to put on the calendar for visiting Palatine. If that's a consensus that everyone's comfortable with, then I think Kate and Kelly would send out some form of a doodle poll to get an idea of dates that would be convenient so we can move forward planning for that. But I'll leave it up to others if anyone wants to chime in and say yes, no, or different. Sharon, do you have any thoughts?
I think I do feel comfortable in April, right? The mask mandate comes down. I would probably continue to wear a mask for a field trip and feel comfortable. I mean,
Okay.
I think that's optional. So, yeah.
Sounds good. So Abby, do you have any thoughts?
I think same as Sharon. I think it's okay.
Okay. Maura?
I agree. I would feel comfortable doing so. I think I would, whether or not I would be comfortable carpooling is a decision I wouldn't really make today, but I think I would be comfortable.
Okay, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm good with April.
Okay, Barbara?
Absolutely. April is fine.
Okay, Stacy?
I agree.
All right, so April it is. So Kate and Kelly, if you would please send out the poll with some dates so we can see if we can get that on the schedule.
We will do so.
Okay. So that was the only item under unfinished business. Under new business, the first item is the fiscal year 23 draft budget. Kate and Anna can present some information about the budget so that we can then give them some feedback. And then the next meeting, they will come back after having taken the feedback and tweaked the budget. So Kate and Anna, I'll turn over to you.
Thanks, Jay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Is everyone able to see what is on the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So today we just want to cover a few things related to the budget that you received in the packet to just give you a more detailed overview of what was included. I'm going to start by talking about some of the considerations that we went through, what things we looked at when preparing the budget. And then Anna is going to go into more detail on the revenue and expenses, and we'll be happy to answer any questions at the end then. Or, I mean, if you want to interrupt while we're going through, that's fine too. So the first is the considerations. And the first thing we looked at was what projects are we planning to do in the next fiscal year? We know that with adopting the village's climate action plan that we have some work that we will be doing not only as an individual institution, but also in partnership with the village. Kelly actually was at the Sustainability Commission meeting tonight before this meeting. She got to have a double meeting evening, so lucky for her. We are looking at things from two different angles. If you recall from when we've talked about this in the past, we're looking at it from an operational standpoint, which Kelly is heading up, and we're also looking at it from a programming standpoint, and that's where we're going to be doing a lot of the partnering with the village. So one of the things the village is planning to do is to do some more gardening things that will allow for more interaction with kids. That's something we plan to partner with them on. Of course, also adding some additional programming to what we already offer to the community. We also will be looking operationally at what changes do we need to make within the organization. And that can include everything from looking at, what type of plates we buy for, staff trainings when we're offering food to make sure they're compostable, to also looking more deeply in the next fiscal year at what steps we want to take from a building updates perspective. And that's something that we'll obviously need to talk with the board more about. And so then we also are continuing with our EDI work. This includes working with a consultant like we had talked about to do an organizational assessment. And then the second part to that would be doing training for the staff and possibly the board if you're interested, as well as then implementing things that we are learning from the assessment, as well as continuing to do ongoing programs for our community on EDI, which we put into the programming budget, as well as doing as part of our staff development budget, some additional staff training in this area. There's kind of the formal training that we're planning to do, as well as more internal staff training that's done with the staff that are on our EDI committee. We also have building projects that are coming up. We have talked about how we paused the third floor fiction and media staff renovation, and that's something we need to look at, as well as other just general building updates. And one of the things that, as I mentioned with the climate action plan, that we do want to talk to the board about later this spring is what would you like to see in terms of sustainability with the different projects that we have coming down, so that we can get a better sense of where we should be leaning and spending our efforts, and how we should be looking at some of these projects in light of the climate action plan goals. And then we also have a website update, which sounds really minor, but it's actually like a complete redesign. We're on Drupal 7, which is at end of life, which is interesting to me because I don't know how like software, I mean, I know how it can, but it feels like it shouldn't be able to do that, but it is. So we have to decide whether or not we need to upgrade to the newest version of Drupal, which would mean modifying the site, or do we want to switch to a new platform, either which is going to require us to work on doing redevelopment of the site, which was last done about 6.5 years ago. And then, oh, sorry, I went too far in the thing. And then after the projects, we have some different considerations that we took into account when we were putting together the budget. One being group insurance. As I'm sure many of you can imagine, health insurance rates have gone up as a result of COVID. And so while we in the past have been very lucky with pretty low increases, or even sometimes with some of them flat increases, this year is a little bit higher, and Anna will get into more of that when we talk about the expenses piece. But that was something that we did have to look at. We are part of an insurance pool, so we benefit by being part of a large group, but it does also mean that things that impact a larger group of people will also impact us, even if we didn't necessarily have a ton of, like, we didn't have any people that were very that had to be in the hospital due to COVID. So, but there are, of course, I think almost 100 intergovernmental agencies that are part of this pool. So there's a lot of people, and of course, some of that did require hospitalization. So that is a piece that we saw an increase in. We also are seeing a sizable increase in our liability insurance, mainly around our cybersecurity. In my report, I talked about the multi-factor authentication, which, as I said, we had done at the administrative level, but hadn't implemented with all staff. There was, I believe, $4 billion in claims last year for cyber liability. And that is something that just even 5 years ago was seen as kind of a nice to have, not a need to have insurance. And that has changed dramatically. So one of the things that we had to look at was what that would mean for us in terms of ongoing costs, and what other additional increases we might see as a result of this. We also have to look at the personnel lines. Personnel accounts for over half of our budget, as it does for pretty much every library that I know. And that is something that we are seeing become increasingly, of course, more important as we see the Great Resignation continue. We're continuing to see salaries getting higher on job postings for staff at all levels. And also looking at where, and this is when we talked about this last in the fall, when we were looking at the levy, we talked about the COLA increases with Social Security, which were not definite at that point. It was projected, and it did come in at 6.1%, which is the highest it's been in over 40 years, as well as the Chicagoland Consumer Price Index increases, which are coming in at 5.9% right now. Those are significantly higher than most organizations have been increasing salaries for staff. And so in the surveys that our HR consultant has done, they have found that businesses in like September, October were planning 2 to 3% increases. Then when you got towards the end of the year, they were like, well, it's going to be more like 4. And now they're just doing another survey. They're predicting that that will climb even more. So one of the things that Anna will be talking about is that we are recommending a larger increase in the personnel line so that we can give staff an appropriate increase to make sure we're keeping up with the cost of living, and also helping us retain the great staff that we have. And then we also looked at programming. We recognize that we're still in a state of flux. We're doing less programming than we were prior to the pandemic, but we're doing a greater variety of in-person, remote, and hybrid programming. We hope, of course, that COVID is waning and is on its way out, but we also recognize that that might increase again, causing us to have to stop in-person programming. You know, cases rise again really high in the fall. So we have pulled back a little bit on the budget line for programming, simply so that we could, one, make sure that we had adequate funding in the other lines, and two, so that we weren't over budgeting with something that is still pretty heavily an unknown. Anna's going to talk more about furniture and equipment, but we did we have been more judicious in, you know, trying to extend the life of different things, whereas, you know, most things have a typical lifespan. Because things haven't been as used in the past 2 years, we're able to extend certain things like, you know, office chairs. Well, there was a great period of time where they weren't as sat in, but there are, of course, still different pieces of furniture and equipment that we are going to need to replace. So there is, of course, still an adequate amount there. And then we also had to look at the technology, which we are at a place where it is time to replace our servers, which is part of our life cycle plan. So this year, the technology budget is higher because of that, because normally with our normal technology replacement, we operate on a 5-year cycle. But then when the servers come in, which is about every 6 years, there is 1 year where it is slightly higher. And Anna will go into that in a little bit more detail. So all of that we thought about as we were putting together all of the numbers. And now I'm going to turn it over to Anna so that she can talk a little bit about what money we're getting and what and what we're spending.
Hi, everyone. So when I was putting together the budget for your review, in October, you had approved a 2.5% levy increase for all of the funds. So I started with revenue and I looked at prior year data to project what was going to happen in 2023. And I tried to be very conservative in my estimates for replacement taxes, fines and fees, and interest income, just so that I wasn't inflating the revenue to, so I wasn't inflating revenue and then we didn't have enough of revenue coming in to handle the expenses that we felt we needed. Other income and designated revenue equal contingency and designated expenses. So it's just kind of an in and an out. Those are just estimates. So, sorry, I'm not clicking this. Kate has the other funds in here as well, FICA and IMRF. She has capital improvement fund, which we do not levy for. The revenue for these funds come primarily from our transfer from the operating fund, as well as bond issuances. And then debt service, which is all from the levy. But we are focusing on the operating levy in this discussion today. Right there. Sorry, I started my presentation, or I started talking before I went through these slides. I apologize. But I think where we need to spend most of our discussion is on the expenses. So personnel services, salaries and wages. As Kate mentioned, COLA is going to be a lot higher than it has in past years. So what we kind of did was we included a 5% cost of living adjustment in our salaries and wages number. And our intention is to offer that to staff on May the 1st. keeping in mind that we will be doing a benchmarking analysis during fiscal year 23 and hoping that if salaries and wages need to be adjusted as a result of that benchmarking analysis, that could be done mid-year, like hopefully towards the end of the calendar year. Our thought process is we also want to make sure we're being competitive in the marketplace as salaries and wages rise around us. So we've tried to include a number, you know, have that number be something that we can work with as we go forward. Group insurance increased, and I did include, I did include an increase for group insurance. I tried to be conservative and increase that amount enough. In last fiscal year, we were not filling positions, and so the insurance number is down because we didn't have those expenses. Unemployment insurance is going up as all insurances are. So I'm sorry, workers' comp is going up. Our unemployment is staying similar. And then staff development, with the number of virtual continuing education opportunities that are available, we are encouraging staff to participate in those right now, and those are a lot less costly than somebody attending continuing education in person. So we took all of that into account when we came up with those numbers. Commodities includes these items, and how we budget for this is we ask the staff what they would like their collection to be, and we compile all of that information, and that's how we get our total materials number. Our materials number is 12.4% of budget, and that is above the, you know, what the
State recommendation.
what the state recommendation is. Thank you. So, and we were able to fulfill all of their requests with this number. So we feel very confident that materials is in the right place. Programming, we also asked staff what they would like their programming number to be for the year. And we were able to satisfy the staff's request with this. But one thing that happened in this fiscal year was we received a donation from the Laird Foundation, and we are going to be using 100% of that donation to fund the reading program. So programming looks like it went down, but it didn't, because there was a donation that is part of restricted that will be spent 100 for the reading programs. Office and library supplies remained the same. We didn't have any issue with that. Software, we did a thorough analysis of our needs with OSG, and we feel that we have everything covered. Postage remained the same. Community relations, we've received notice that there will be increases for our virtual marketing and our print marketing. So we increased our number to accommodate that. And we also increased community relations so that we can participate in outreach events and connect with patrons a little bit more as we are coming out of the pandemic, hopefully. And then janitorial supplies remained consistent year over year. Contractual services. It includes all of these items. OCLC remained consistent. I deleted the wrong line. It shouldn't say ILL, it should say CCS. Sorry, Kate.
That's okay.
Our general insurance number is increasing. Our broker has informed us that he provided anywhere, the average is 8% increase, but he provided anywhere from a 5% to a 15% increase. Like Kate explained, cyber insurance has really gone up quite a bit, like doubled. And we had to take that into account. Telephone and internet, there's a decrease in this line because of a change in the provider and the services for our standard phone lines for elevator and the area of rescue. So that helped us decrease the cost there. Professional services has increased for the website redesign, having the EDI consultant, and completing the benchmarking. Equipment rental and maintenance includes the maintenance agreements costs for the automated handler and the RFID system. Contracted services overall just includes conservative increase just for general costs. All the other areas remained consistent year over year. Furniture and equipment, we've set aside funds on this line for furniture and equipment needs that are not covered in the facility plan, and feel that the number is good. Most of these costs are IT related with the
Servers.
not with servers, with computers, not the hard, like not that kind of hardware, but computers and that kind of stuff. Contingency is just a catch-all for whatever, that isn't kind of designated above. And board development is for you guys to do fun stuff and learn about libraries. Designated expenses, this is where the reading program costs will come out of. This, we plan to use some restricted funds from prior years that on the server costs that we're going to incur. And these funds were donated to the library to use as needed, so they weren't given with a specific use. So that's why this line has gone up. And then, as always, we have transfers to debt service and our construction fund. Debt service is to cover property taxes that aren't received. So it's normally about $25,000 or less. And then we budget an annual transfer to CIF to fund the facility plan projects and to reduce future bond issuances. And please keep in mind that any funds that are not spent during the fiscal year, we ask once a year to transfer those excess funds to the capital improvement fund to reduce future bond issuances. And that's it. I'm sorry if I bumbled along in that, but I hope everybody understands everything. And if you have any questions, please ask.
Yeah, and so just to kind of wrap up where Anna left off, we hope that this gives you a good overview of things. I think the biggest takeaways are that we're continuing to focus on the sustainability efforts and EDI efforts, but that personnel is going to continue to be a large area of focus for us in the coming year, as it always has been. Just making sure that we are providing good returns for staff so that they want to stay here, and also ensuring that we have appropriate funding to remain adequately staffed. We're not planning to increase the staff or anything. The staffing levels will remain the same, but this is, I think, going to be for all organizations an area that people will have to pay a lot of closer attention to. And as Anna showed you with the materials and programmings, which I think when people think of the libraries, those are the two main areas. We still have really good funding in those areas to be able to meet the community need. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see what questions people have.
Kate, I'm going to start just with a little bit of feedback. So my thoughts on some of the considerations you've addressed, whether it's dealing with the climate action plan, EDI, or some of these other initiatives, is that they are considerations that need to be taken into account as part of operations and budgeting, but that they shouldn't be the focus of the budget. And so I would like to have the staff consider alternatives, and with respect to projects, they should be taking into account the opportunities for alternatives that would incorporate the EDI plan, and they would take into account alternatives that would incorporate the action plan for the climate action plan. But I think that they need to also keep in mind that within the budget, they have to make sure that these considerations and alternatives fit within the framework of what we have. We do have limited resources, so we need to be mindful that we don't have carte blanche to do everything we would like to necessarily. And so we have to make some tough choices when we are looking at the budget. Otherwise, we're going to find our budget ballooning far too quickly. And I don't know that the community would be happy with us if that were to happen. That being said, I do think that you have budgeted appropriately for the staff levels. We have been very conservative the past several years with respect to the budgeting. This year, we are seeing a considerable amount of indications that there'll be inflation this year. And so I think it's expected that we are going to see a need for salaries to rise a little bit more than they have in the past in order to cover those cost of living adjustments, just to keep staff at an equivalent spending level that they are at now without giving them real dollar wage increases. So I think that the 5%, while significantly higher than what we've done in the past, looks like it may be the appropriate conservative step in order for you to be able to plan properly. That being said, I think I'll ask each of the trustees if they would like to take a few minutes to comment. I'll start with Sharon. So Sharon, if you have questions or thoughts.
Great job, Anna. You did not stumble through it. That's just a lot of work, and we really appreciate it. I think, we truly appreciate your conservatism, you being conservative, because I think that does help us know that we're being fiscally responsible. So, based on that, I think we're good to go for the future.
Abby, do you have some thoughts or questions?
I agree. I feel comfortable with everything that was presented. The 5% cost of, what is it, COLA, cost of living? Have we done that in the past? I just don't remember seeing that before.
We have done an increase, but not that.
Not that high.
We usually are 2 to 4% is what has been typical, I would say, for the last decade.
Abby, what we've done in the past is we've done like a 1.9% COLA increase, which was kind of in line with where things were before. But then we also did a merit increase based upon staff evaluations. So we would go, and the raises would be anywhere from 2.4% to maybe 5% in total. So what this is doing is saying it's going to be a 5% like base increase, no merit on May the 1st. And then what the plan would be is to do the benchmarking analysis and incorporate all of those changes by the end of the year.
Okay, that's a part I wasn't sure about as well, if there's a merit that goes into this also, because I'm familiar with the merit. I know we've talked about that before. So it's just no merit, and it's more geared towards the environment of the Great Resignation, like you said, and staff retention and all that. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And Abby, I would also just add, we haven't done merit for the last 2 years because we haven't done our formal annual evaluation. It, as I'm sure all of you are aware, is very hard to do an evaluation based on metrics that were very true in 2019 without redoing every single form for a situation that we wouldn't be able to anticipate. So it didn't feel that we would be able to do those equitably or fairly, given the pandemic and the constant changes with what we were doing, what we're asking staff to do. So we certainly do plan in the future to move back to that once we're able to get back on a more even keel where we're able to evaluate people based on those consistent metrics. We're just not there yet. So.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but Abby, this is different is what you're getting at, which is in the past, we haven't had the budget necessarily tied directly to what individual staff members would see in their personal compensation. Whereas this year, I think Kate and Anna are saying that the two will track each other at that 5% level, as opposed to a budget increasing 5%, but then within the pool of our staff, there's individual differences.
Right. So, okay. So I just want to make sure. So instead of there being like a bucket of money, we disperse that in like a salary planning, we're just saying it's a 5% bucket and we're doing that across the board.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think they both shook their head, yes.
Yeah.
Well,
No.
There's a 5% bucket that we will be giving to all the staff, but then there's also an additional bucket that will be used for benchmarking.
Which we do not do every year.
Which we don't do every year, and we don't know how those funds will be dispersed. Does that make sense?
Right, because in typical salary planning, like you start with a number and then you cascade it down. That's how this second bucket is working. I don't mean to spend too much time on this, but
okay.
Yeah, we can share if it would be helpful. The salary schedule, which is what we'll be updating with the salary benchmarking, we can put that in next month so you can just see where those lines are. And of course, we do increase it every year based on the COLA and CPI numbers. So it isn't that we haven't increased the salary grades. It's just that we haven't re-benchmarked based on each job description. Which is what we're going to do. And we may have seen changes, especially over the last 2 years, in what the market is asking for. For instance, like we've seen in a lot of restaurants, the, base cost for employees has risen quite dramatically because the demand is very high. So that's something that will be considered as part of this benchmarking process.
so salary benchmarking is about each individual role aligning to the marketplace. COLA is across the board. Your salary benchmarking, you're going to look at our positions priced correctly for the market, and then merit is the third thing that we're not doing this year.
Correct.
Okay.
Because we don't have a way to actually evaluate and do a merit increase with any type of objectivity, right?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for taking so long on that, but it actually makes sense now.
It's okay. That's an important part of the budget, so thank you.
I mean, it's over half the
Jamie?
budget, so yeah.
Yeah. Jamie, do you have questions or issues you'd like to raise?
No, I thought it was thoughtfully conducted and presented. Jay, can you repeat what your comment was? I didn't completely get that.
Oh, they were correcting me. So within the salary line, the compensation line, there's going to be a cost of living component for across the board increase. There is going to be then, after the salary benchmark, some component that is looked at individually in the different positions that'll go to be allocated to staff, not equally, but based upon the benchmarking survey. That's what we were talking about.
Oh, no,
So that's
yes,
what-
sorry, not that part, but the one you were talking about, how the ED&I and the climate.
So, okay. Yeah, so Kate was talking about how as part of the budget, they were taking into consideration the impacts that these different planning issues would have on the budget. So we've got the EDI issues that we've been addressing this year. And so if you looked at the report that Anna had in this month, she talked about how there was an additional expense or increase in expense for job searching because of the different advertising for EDI. And so Kate was saying that they've taken into consideration as part of the budget, the EDI. We also now have the new climate action plan. And so one of the issues Kate and Anna were considering was how does that impact the budget? And so when you start looking at some of the large projects in construction, the thought is we're going to have material issues. We may have options that are more sustainable options or less sustainable options. And then they're going to be looking at what are the alternatives to try and implement some of this planning as part of, and I'm using the example of a construction project, but it may be something different. Kate was talking about when they're doing general purchasing within the library for just general supplies, they may be looking at more or less sustainable options. Yeah. And there's a presumption that when you're looking at more sustainable, you're talking about changing materials, that may be more expensive because they're not as widely available, and it may cost more to produce something that's more sustainable. And so my comment was just simply that I don't think that sustainability and EDI are the singular focus that need to be the primary driving force behind some of these decisions. I think they are a feature that should be taken into consideration as part of the process, and the budgetary consideration should be weighed against them as part of the process, so that the staff should be taking them into consideration, but not making the decisions solely based upon the sustainability or the EDI issue.
Okay, thank
That
you.
was my
Sorry. I didn't, but I agree with you too.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Jamie, or should we move on? Okay, Maura,
We can move
I
on.
don't know, you want to?
Barbara had her hand up if you wanted to go first, Barbara.
Oh, it makes no difference. I guess
Oh,
I
okay.
come back to the whole idea of a strategic plan and how the individual pieces fit into that, and how we are working smarter in making sure that, for instance, professional development doesn't always mean paying money for it. It could mean staff member to staff member or a mentor. But a strategic plan seems to be needed to ground some of this, so that some of these are just expenses that are going to occur and they are naturally occurring. But I guess some of it feels like it's kind of ephemeral without it being attached to an overarching plan.
Kate, do
That's
you
it.
want to address that?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure Barbara was done. I'm looking at my phone because my computer's still frozen. So sorry if I'm looking weird. So yes, I absolutely agree. It does make things a lot harder to not have it all attached within a strategic plan. We had a strategic plan that was supposed to go through 2021. We obviously did not complete the stuff really in 2020 or 2021. Now a lot of that has been, I don't want to say is no longer important, but the focus has inevitably shifted due to COVID and emerging needs and interests. So we have not had we have not updated that plan. And I do think that that is something that we should do. I think that one of the challenges, we've been very focused on getting our staffing levels back up. And unfortunately, the last couple of months also derailed us a little bit with some of that, as we had a lot of COVID cases and COVID quarantining. So it's more a matter of the bandwidth doing that. I absolutely agree that it would ensure that we were all on the same page, that we were carrying out and focusing on the areas that the board wants us to focus on, and to what level of detail. When we last did the strategic plan, we did kind of a modified plan in that we didn't really do any community surveying or going out, and we certainly could do kind of a more quick and dirty, if you will, strategic plan. But if the board wanted to do a more detailed one that would, to really be effective, I feel you would need to do not just the surveying with the board, but also to do that larger community-wide surveying and analysis to make sure that we were meeting the needs of the community. While we certainly have a lot of feedback that we get and take into account from the community, we're very lucky. This is a very actively engaged community. So we get a lot of good feedback when we do surveys, even just in our general comments. So we do get a good sense of what people are interested in. So I do think that that would certainly help. I also think that right now, the challenge is, do we have the bandwidth to do that, and what would that mean in terms of what type of process? And if that is something the board would like to do, then of course we will make that happen. It's more been a matter of the timing on it. That was a lot, sorry.
Kate, I thought that we were putting that on the calendar, not necessarily for the current month or next month, but sometime in the next year, is to discuss the strategic planning and how to go about doing the next round. Do you have that on the long-term calendar?
I had it to talk about like towards the end of the calendar year so that we could plan for something beyond, in like early 2023. But so certainly we could look at doing that sooner. I think for me, the most pressing need right now is focusing on getting the salary benchmarking, which we'll be doing an analysis of all of the job descriptions, which you need to do in order to then do the benchmarking to make sure that the job descriptions are accurately reflecting the work being done, which things have changed due to the pandemic. In order to review those job descriptions, we need to complete the EDI assessment, because part of it is making sure that the language we are using and how we are making sure that those are accessible, making sure that that is reflecting that work. And so it's kind of a bit of a domino effect of the EDI assessment, which will then lead to the salary benchmarking, which will ensure that we are paying staff appropriately in order to retain the great staff that we have. And then my thought was that then after that, which we hope to have finished this fall, would be then doing the strategic plan where we know we're in a good place operationally and can focus on what are the long-term needs of the library.
So what you're kind of pointing out, though, is that in terms of the next budget cycle, it's not likely to have been completed by then, which I think was what Barbara was getting at, is that it would be helpful to have the strategic plan in place for the budgeting purposes. So Barbara, I mean, having heard some of the items on the calendar.
Of course. And it was not meant, my comment was not meant to make Kate defensive or.
No, not at all.
It's just, and believe me, I understand what time constraints and priorities and people first. But I just felt in commenting about the budget that it just didn't seem to hang on anything concrete.
Yep.
So, no emergency, just a comment.
Okay.
I look forward to the day when we can get back to that, because it certainly makes the whole process a lot easier when we have a lot more clear direction and focus, and making sure that we are moving the library in the direction that is most of most benefit to the community. So yes, I wish that there are more hours in the day. I also wish that my brain was less tired than it was, but it'll get there. COVID's going to end. It's going to be great.
Barbara, do you have any other questions or comments, or should we go back to Maura?
Please go back to Maura, and thank you.
Maura?
I was just going to echo the statement that I thought Anna's presentation was very thorough, and it made a lot of sense logically. And I think, Kate, you clarified this in your response, but I just wanted to make sure. So we are going to go back to sort of the more traditional COLA and merit-based afterwards.
Yes.
So we'll revisit that again next year. Hopefully things will be more normal then.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So just a flat increase with the hopes that we move back to the merit next year.
Okay. So that was the only thing I was going to ask for clarification on, but you did that. And then I also think with the strategic plan that it does make sense. It's hard to imagine trying to put the strategic plan forward without the sort of cloud of COVID hanging over us. So I think it does make sense to sort of, I hate to say put it on the back burner, but I'm sure it's in it's something that you're thinking about, but to sort of address it more formally once we're out from under this a little bit more. So, and that was it.
Okay. Stacy, would you like to ask any questions?
I don't have any questions. I also appreciate how thorough the presentation was and the detail, and also how some of the priorities around EDI and the climate action plan were brought forward as we start to understand how those things will be operationalized at the library long term.
Okay. So Kate and Anna, it sounds like everyone is, pretty comfortable with the work you've done in terms of preparing the budget. So I don't see any significant changes that are being asked to make for the next month's meeting. So I think we'll just keep it on the agenda for next month for final approval.
Right.
Okay. All right, then moving on to the next item on the agenda. It's the work from home updated policy. So Kate, do you want to take a minute and to explain what the changes have been made to the policy?
Sure. So as I mentioned in my memo in the packet, this policy was approved in February. The original policy was approved in February 2020 because none of us knew what was coming in March. And while it was a really good policy then, I still feel obviously a lot has changed. And so we moved away from where we originally had focused the policy on, which was largely if someone needed to be out for a medical reason, or they needed to work remotely because they were, caring for someone and needed, were able to work a little bit remotely, to give people that option. Now we still have kept that component in it, but wanted to increase the flexibility around this based on what we have learned throughout the last 2 years of the pandemic. So we've added a couple additional kind of categories. One, which is for people that can do their work remotely, which, there are some staff like our shelvers that need to be in the building in order to perform their jobs, but we have other staff that would be able to do parts of their job very successfully remotely, where they can ask to have kind of a semi-permanent remote work schedule put in place, where they might work 1 to 2 days a week remotely in order to possibly work on more project-based work, to work on deeper work. Collection development is the example that always comes to my mind of instead of having to be out on a service desk and getting interrupted and working in the staff area, staff that purchase for our collections could spend a day a week or every other week, whatever was needed, and they could really get quite a bit more done. We know that they work very productively from home based on the past 2 years. And then the other piece is kind of even a little bit more looser of oh, hey, I'm going to use poor Kelly as an example. She had a radon mitigation system that she had to have installed in her home recently, or replaced in her home. And it was oh, hey, they're going to come tomorrow. She can work completely perfectly from home. So rather than having to take a day, having that work pile up, she's able to just bring her laptop home on kind of a very last minute basis and be able to do that successfully. Again, dependent upon the nature of the work. That would be determined by each manager in terms of desk coverage and needs of the department, but giving the managers more of the flexibility so it doesn't have to be a formal request to HR, which would, of course, put additional burden and more paperwork on administration, as well as make it a lot harder for staff to ask kind of at the last minute. So those are the major changes, again, with the intent that we provide more flexibility, reflecting the changes that have happened in work and how people view work and where they can successfully do the work. I also included some of the procedural stuff just so you could kind of see the entire circle, the entire process for that. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions or flesh things out even more if you would like.
Does anybody have questions for Kate on the changes? Seeing lots of no's and the nods. So hearing no questions or seeing no questions, I'm going to ask if there is a motion to approve the updated work from home policy as presented.
I'll move to approve the updated work from home policy.
Thank you, Maura.
I'll
Is there a
second it.
second? Thank you,
I'll
Sharon.
second it.
Thank you, Sharon. Jennifer, can we please have a roll call vote?
Ms. Bernstein,
Yes.
Ms. Chrisham,
Yes.
Mr. Globinger,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver,
Yes.
Ms. Shu,
Yes.
Ms. Young,
Yes.
Ms. Unical.
Yes.
Okay, the motion has passed. Kate, the policy is approved.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on The agenda is the PDC Chicago LPIV, well, that's probably Roman numeral, but Inc. 4000 Commercial Avenue Class 6B request. So this was included in the materials. Before we get into the specifics of the request, earlier in the meeting, I alluded to the fact that there has been a request by the village for feedback from the different governing bodies for changes to the 6P process. So right now, the village sends to each board the 6P information, and there is a 45-day window for the boards to meet, review it, to have the boards give feedback, and then get back to the village. The village, because of concerns with the time period, is asking the boards for feedback and whether or not they would be comfortable with having that period reduced. The village is asking that it go from 45 days to roughly 2.5 weeks, roughly. Kate, was there a specific number of days that they were saying?
20 days is what they were saying.
20 days. Okay, so 2.5 weeks roughly, which is a fairly considerable time reduction. My personal feeling is that that is a bit of a significant problem for us. As a board that meets once a month, that would mean that we would not necessarily have an opportunity to review it and present it at a meeting and get full feedback from the board. And the village is basically saying that they would like the boards to either empower the heads of the body, meaning Kate, to review and give feedback to the village, or to just, to the extent that they're able to meet in that time period, meet and review it, or otherwise just rely on the head. I think that I don't like that time period. I have no objection to the idea of reducing the time period because they want to give developers and businesses that are interested in making applications a quicker turnaround time. And so I would think that if they were to say like 30 days, which would give us an opportunity to consider it at a meeting during the following month when it's presented, that would be reasonable. But I think going from 45 to 20 is a fairly significant reduction. And so, I mean, my thought was yes, but no. Because we still would like to have the board have an opportunity at a meeting to consider it. The downside, or the alternative though, is that rarely do we object. Usually these are, this isn't just unique to the library board, it's pretty much across the board within Northbrook. Usually these are accommodated fairly well. They're not super frequent. There's a few of them that come during the year. Usually, for the most part, the village does a good job of vetting them before they're presented for those that are more appropriate. We have seen some that are less appropriate because the buildings don't necessarily fit all the criteria that the county is looking for. And ultimately, it's not a village decision, it's a county decision. The village gives feedback and the county is looking for the village to say yay or nay, but then the county makes the ultimate decision. And so, I mean, I don't know if there's any thoughts on any of the members of the boards that they have strong feelings one way or the other. So I'll give it an opportunity if anyone wants to respond.
Okay. That's a quick turnaround, but I can see why they'd want that quicker turnaround, just to sort of move things along.
Yeah.
I mean,
One thing
how
I'll
would
tell you,
we do
Sharon,
that though? What's our
we would just have
workaround?
to, we would basically have to say, Kate, you know, to the extent there's no board meeting, we're going to rely on you to evaluate and respond. One of the things I'll say, Sharon, in terms of the, you know, reasoning behind it, usually it's because they want to give quicker feedback to the parties who are looking to buy property in Northbrook. As an attorney who does a lot of real estate transactions, I can tell you when I have a client who's looking at a commercial industrial property where they may be considering applying for something like a 6B, one of the first things I tell them is you have to build that into the contract, whatever the time period is for the village you're considering. And so we need to find out right away, how much time does it take, so that when we're looking at contingencies for that approval, we put in an appropriate time period so that the contract tracks what the reality is of the village's time frame. And so it is something that can be planned out, whether it's 45 days or 21 days. Of course, anyone who's buying property wants a decision quicker rather than later. They want to move along. You know, so to the extent we can be accommodating and reduce, you know, have some reduction, I think it's appropriate. I just felt that 21 or 20 days was way too short for us.
I have a question. Would it be, is it possible to put in there a provision that 21 days unless it's a project that looks like it will have some controversy? Like, could we empower Kate to sort of look it over and say, you know, this one is one that I do want our board's approval on, but sort of, or
Yeah, I mean,
should our response be contingent on our approval?
Yeah, the problem is they're looking for, a time period that applies all across the village, not just the library. And
Okay,
so, they're looking at the overall time period for everyone, including the village itself. And so that's kind of why I say, from us, it's a problem. Kate, she hasn't said today, but when we were talking, pointed out that we could always call a special meeting if we had to.
Mhm.
But typically, we're not focused on that as a primary purpose for a meeting. And so
right,
we typically wouldn't be the board that would call it. The village board meets more frequently, and some of the other governing bodies may meet more frequently, so that the 21 days would still fall within a meeting window. For
right.
us, because we're once a month, it just means it wouldn't necessarily fall within one of our meeting windows. So, and
What
because
about-
this is
Oh.
I was gonna say, this is an item that impacts the budgets, and that's why I feel it's important enough that we need to make sure it's something that the board can, give feedback on.
Hmm.
Barbara, I didn't know if you were raising your hand with a question or not.
You're muted.
I would ask you, Jay, to give us a recommendation, because
Yeah, I think the recommendation would be say to the village that we're happy to see a reduction, but we prefer it be 30 days, not 20 days. So that we have time to meet and review it and respond as a board.
I think that makes sense. And if they want to overrule or override us, they can.
Exactly.
Okay. Is the park district, does the board of the park district, do they operate similarly? Do they meet, and do they have to approve these as well, or are they invited to approve them? Okay,
Yeah, all the governing bodies, so all the school districts are
Right.
invited to give feedback. The park district,
and they all meet
we
once a
are-
month as well, right?
right. Well,
Okay.
most of them do. I think some of the school districts may meet more frequently.
Okay,
But I think the park district is more like us, where it's once a month.
okay. I was just curious
And-
what they were, if they were approving, if they were okay with the 21 days, or if they wanted.
Kate, do you know?
You know what? We have not had one of our meetings since this came out. We're meeting next week. So I know that isn't helpful to this conversation, and I did not. I was focused on mask questions when I reached out the last time. So I'm sorry, I did not ask them about this.
Okay.
Oh, that's okay.
I would assume they're probably gonna be the same as us, Maura, that
Yeah.
they're gonna want to have the board meet and, to get feedback.
Yeah.
So,
I agree. I think
So I
30
guess-
sounds reasonable.
okay.
Yeah, 31.
Yeah, Kate, so if you wouldn't mind, if that would be the response you would give. On this particular 6B, so this is the Motorola property that's at the back corner of Sky Harbor. It's the northwest corner. There is a, I guess, developer, I'll call him, who is under contract to buy it. They want to tear down the existing building, which is aging and not suitable for redevelopment, by just modifying it according to what they said. And so their plan is to build a new, bigger facility that it wasn't clear to me exactly what they're doing with it, but it's some sort of more progressive use for a office/commercial space. And so they're within the requirements of the 6B for new construction. It's a large scale project. They've made it clear that they're only going to go forward with it if they do get the 6B accommodation from the village. I'm not sure, because there was no EDC meeting in January, where the village stands on it and what the others feedbacks. A couple of the things that stood out to me is the village typically with a 6B request includes some requirements for the 6B request, one of which is that the recipient does not have the right or waives any right to a future request for another 6B, meaning if in a few years they were to expand the property and be eligible for going in on the expansion for a 6B request, that they are precluded from doing so. They would not be able to go in and ask for an additional 6B on that expansion. Likewise, the village also includes a requirement that they waive their right to contest the reassessments when they come out from the county over the 10-year period. This particular applicant has asked the village to not require those two conditions to the granting of the 6B. In reading the information I was given, I think it is a large-scale project that would be beneficial in Northbrook. I think that it is suitable for a 6B under the normal conditions that the village would impose. It is, because it's such a substantial dollar value here, in the projections, they were really giving large numbers. It looked like without the 6B, they were projecting about a 27 million expense for real estate taxes over the life of the period for the 6B, whereas with the 6B, it would be cut to roughly, I think it was 11 million and change. So, significantly less than half of the liability over that period is what they would be seeing in terms of the reduction. And I thought that was fairly significant. Big dollars and big percentages. And so I thought that, this looked like the prime thing for a 6B to be approved, but I do think it would be appropriate for the village to include their normal conditions for a couple of reasons. One, because of the size and scope of this, it would seem to be one where we wouldn't want to see continued reductions through other avenues that would impact negatively the budgets for all the governing bodies. And two, it opens up the door for any future recipient or requester of a 6B to ask for the same treatment. And the village board has really been pretty consistent with treating everyone equally in terms of the conditions and the requirements for the granting of the 6Bs. And so my thought was that to the extent the board is generally approving of the concept of a 6B for this property, that our feedback be yes, but we would like to see the village conclude their typical conditions and requirements for this project, similar to what they would do for any other project. I don't know if there are any questions, thoughts, comments. Maura, I know this is more something that you may be familiar with from your professional, so I don't know if you have any thoughts.
No questions. No.
Anyone else have any? So,
You convinced me.
say it again, Jay.
You convinced me. No, I just thought what you said was really good.
Okay. So I guess I'll just ask, the motion we would make here is to approve contingent on, or, with the recommendation that the village include its typical requirements for a 6B. So is there a motion for that? You're on mute, Barbara.
I don't even know how to frame it. I move that we follow whatever Jay said in terms of
So moved is what you're saying?
for the 6B.
Okay, so it would be to approve the 6B with the village, including its typical conditions and requirements for a 6B.
What he said.
Okay, is there a second to Barbara's
A
motion?
second.
Okay, Jennifer, would you be so kind as to do a roll call?
Ms. Bernstein,
Yes.
Ms. Christian,
Yes.
Mr. Globinger,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver,
Yes.
Ms. Shu,
Yes.
Ms. Young,
Abby, you cut out.
Ms. Young,
Yes.
Ms. Unical.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion passes. So Kate, you'll pass along the recommendation to the board?
I will.
Thank you. All right, so that was all of the new business. The next agenda item is closed session, but there's none or no items to go into closed session for. The agenda building, Kate, I don't have any notes here for agenda building, other than sending out the calendar or the doodle poll for the Palatine visit, or the any items for
And the
next
budget.
agenda.
We'll bring the budget back next
Budget.
month. And then I will also hopefully have a Cedar Lane update to talk about with the board next month as well.
Okay. Are there any other items that any of the board members would like to ask be put on the agenda?
I don't really have no, I don't have that. I have a question for Kelly, but I can do that at the end.
I just have a quick question. So I'm glad we went virtual, and I'm happy that we're going virtual. How do we make the decision, say next month, that we're going to be in person or virtual? Do we do the same thing, just sort of take a vote prior to the meeting?
So last month, I think at the end of the meeting, Kate had gone around and just asked everyone what their comfort level was for February. For March, Kate and I talked, and I think Kate was feeling that, assuming that the numbers continue to decline, that it would be appropriate in March to go back to a in-person meeting, probably with masks, assuming that everyone would be comfortable doing it that way. But it's open for everyone to kind of give input and what their thoughts are. So Sharon, what is your thought?
I'm happy to go in person with Matt. It would be so nice to meet Stacy in person. So, yeah, I'm willing to go back and make a last minute call should the numbers change.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts on that issue?
I would agree with that. I will have to miss next month's meeting. I have a performance for my daughter's theatrical performance, so I won't be able to attend that one.
Does anyone else have any conflicts next month? It's right the week before most spring breaks. So hopefully anyone who has spring break is not going to be conflicted out because of that. I don't see any other feedback. And unless there's other items anyone would ask be put on the agenda, we're ready to adjourn. Okay, hearing none, seeing none, Kate, we will adjourn the meeting. Kelly, what time is it?
It is 8:50.
8:50. Okay, so longer than last month's, but still a fairly good meeting. Good night, everybody.